talk about failures. In our heads, we tend to think that they occur because someone did something wrong.
We have common goals, we have common tools, we have common culture, but specialization still exists.
Graphic designers can really communicate information in a way that even dashboards are challenged to show.
Ein ganz anderes Niveau an Automatisierung erreichen. Hunderte Datenbankserver, hunderte Datenbankcluster verwalten und betreiben ohne Administrator heutzutage in der Cloud überhaupt kein Thema mehr.
No matter what you pick, the technology stack should really depend on your skills and what you want to do going forward.
Keine neuen Steuerelemente. Es sind kleinere Dinge, die aber trotzdem helfen, dass unsere alten Anwendungen auch an die moderne Zeit besser angepasst sind.
Something that absolutely not available for native apps, right? And we cannot reason about 50K.
How many of you got packages in Packagist? Any of those? Okay.
My way of approaching DDD is learning kind of one thing at a time.
welche APIs sind meine Topseller, welche Applikationen, welche Konsumenten rufen meine APIs am meisten auf, wo macht es am meisten Sinn rein zu investieren.
So thinking big should really be seen through this lens of platforms and ecosystems.
Und deswegen können wir hergehen und können unseren echten Backend-Server gegen die Functional Essence vergleichen.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the last keynote of this conference. This is the DevOps conference. This is a DevOps conference and the DevOps conference. And this keynote is about the last mile in DevOps, which is operations, the ops part of DevOps. And this keynote is dealing exactly with the last mile and why it's important not only tell the story of DevOps from a developer perspective, but also from a purely operations perspective. Our keynote speaker is a well-known name in the DevOps field, an influential thinker, speaker, writer, and consultant and maker. And I'm really looking forward to his keynote. Please give a hand to Damon Edwards.
Thank you, Sebastian. Can we give Sebastian a round of applause? There's whole team in SNS. They do a great job with this conference, and it's first class. So thank you. So he said, my name is Damon Edwards. A bit about this notion of the last mile. It's a term that came out of the telco or the telephone industry, which is, they build these networks, right? And all this value is stored up in building out this big network. And you don't realize that value until you go that last mile, until you connect to the customer. So, in the telco world, they talk a lot about the last mile problem. You invest all of this, and then you can't get the value out until you go the final distance. And we've noticed in my travels in the kind of the DevOps world, a lot of companies, especially large enterprises, are investing a lot in the pipelines, in deployment, on kind of the dev side of the house, and they aren't really seeing the full returns that they were promised, and often because they haven't gone that last mile. They haven't looked at how does operations work and how can we transform operations to get the full value. So to get started, I have this thesis that developers have had an unfair advantage, right? If you think about it, think about the cartoonish kind of dev to ops pipeline. If you think about the dev side of the house, for about 18 or so years now, this Agile idea has been seeping into their brains. Now, maybe everybody wasn't doing Agile, but the ideas were out there. It's in the tools, it's in the books, it's in the conference speeches, ideas like flow and fast feedback, and working in small batches and cross-functional teams. These ideas have been percolating and coming through the developer world for quite some time. But if you think about it, what was the last great intellectual movement on the operations side of the world? It was probably ITIL, right? Going back to 1989, very much a functionally aligned, command and control driven way of thinking. So if you think about it, who's had the head start here, right? Developers have had all these ideas about flow and fast feedback, and that just hasn't permeated into the operations world. And worse, developers get to work on the new thing, right? If you think about operations, they're taking care of all the stuff that was the new thing for the last 20 years, right? So all these things built with that kind of ITIL mindset is what they've been dealing with. And now you've got developers coming in strong with all of their fast flow ideas. And so now here we are in 2019, right? And ops is in this very tough position, which is on one hand, they're being told, go faster, open things up, go, 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 right? Digital transformation, DevOps, decoupling, move faster, give everybody access, right? At the same time, often from the same business folks coming through the other side, they're being told, whoa, lock it down, don't be the next hack, don't be the next breach, keep us out of the news, right? So ops is in this very difficult position, being squeezed between these two forces and having to catch up on this way of thinking and working and structuring their lives. So to get started here, I want to spend the next few minutes telling you a story. This is a true story. This all took place inside a large enterprise. Their names will remain anonymous. They've been changed to protect the not so innocent. But this company was very proud of the work they'd put into their transformation. They had a digital transformation program, an agile transformation program. DevOps was roaring, right? They got a nascent SRE program going on, transforming systems administrators into to SREs. On the tool side, it's cloud, Docker, Kubernetes, microservices, go, 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 right? And it looks so cool. And they're making a lot of great progress. But what nobody was talking about is what happens after deployment, right? There's always this finish line of how many times a day are we deploying app code and go, 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 and how fast can we get through that pipeline. But where it got interesting is what happened when you kind of pierced through that mirage of deployment and you ended up in operations. So imagine your minds here, right? It was just another Tuesday, right? And, this 9:30 in the morning, these alarms start going off kind of in the knock, and they're like, there's been some problems with these services this past week. Is this the same problem? Is it a different problem? We're not really sure. A short while later, a business manager, the phone rings. I guess the person's running while they're on the phone, saying, oh, we got customers reporting issues. We got a problem, right? So 10 a.m., they escalate, right? And what do? They open up a ticket, right? This ticket, because they don't know what the problem is, sends out this blast to all these new app-specific SREs that have this new team. And they escalate to them, so they all get on the bridge call, right? I'm sure some of you have been on these calls. And they start going through this, try that loop, right? Now, of course, they're not really fully trusted. They don't have access to certain environments, so they got to get folks from the legacy systems administrations team to help give them access. So now we got interruptions going on, right? We got people context switching off their other work, a lot of waiting for people to assemble. Then we got the dog pile, right? Which is, how many times have you ever been on one of these calls and you log into a machine, or you're on the call and someone says, oh, I think there's a problem with this database, right? And then you log into that database and you run top, and the first 10 entries you see are your other 10 colleagues on the call running top, right, at the same time. So you get all these collisions going on. And of course, the business manager, they wouldn't be a manager unless they were good at this. They found their way into that bridge call, right? And all they're asking is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? So disconnected access problems, distractions galore, right? So finally they go, this is a problem with the foo service, right? And the business manager is, can we fix it, right? And the foo SRE is like, no, this is a totally new version of the service. They're all Dockerized. I'm not really sure. It's brand new. Okay, so we got to escalate this, right? So now it's noon. They're passing off partially done work here. We're escalating again. There's waiting while the escalation happens. So they escalate to the foo lead dev. That's Karen, right? She sits in the cool new building with the open floor plan, not the one with the holes in the wall like the ops folks are in. She's drinking her tea, her headphones are on. She's ignoring everything because she's on her sprint, kind of towards the finish. Until finally, knock, someone knocks on her door, is like, hey, you seen these tickets coming your way? She's like, no, I guess not, but I'll go take a look. Right, so now she's being interrupted. There's more context switching going on here. And she looks at this thing and says, I don't know what's going on. Right? Anybody? Of course not, right? So not to Lee's fault. We just go around and around and around about not that one, not this one, no, the other one, okay? And finally she goes, who restarted these services? or actually, let me kind of jump back real quick. So you see at the bottom there, I got this little thing kind of in gray. I call it the context wagon, right, or the context car, right, which is anytime you're working this very ticket-driven way, everyone keeps getting added to these tickets. And whether or not you're actively working on it, it's eating up a little context in your brain, right? So as we go, we'll see the context wagon getting bigger when each kind of person gets pulled into this thing, and it's occupying a little bit of their mind, right? So it's now, where are we at? It's 2 p.m., right? So she's like, hey, who restarted these services and why, right? These containers were all started with the wrong environment variables. This entire service pool needs to be restarted. We're probably going to see a bunch of weird, brownout kind of outages. So in this world, they gave the Docker infrastructure to the middleware team because why not, right? So I said, hey, middleware team, please urgent restart all of these, the entire app pool, and use the correct environment variables, right? So more partially done work, more waiting, more interruptions being sent off to other people, forcing more context switching. As soon as Bob sends that out, Melissa, the middleware manager, calls him on the phone. Are you nuts? It's the middle of the day, right? We can't just be restarting services. You need business approval because we had problems previously with this. Now you got to have business approval to restart anything during the day. So Bob updates the ticket for the SVP of the whole business line, right? And says, hey, we got a problem here, and we need to do this restart, right? So the SVP is Susan. She tries hard. She's got a lot of business things on her plate, a lot of talking to customers. So she has her chief of staff assemble the VPs, or get them on the phone or email and Slack, and say, hey, can we do this restart, right? Now, of course, what do they say? Hey, it's a restart of a web service, right? How bad can it be? Why don't we go ahead and do it, right? You know what's coming, don't you? So there's interruptions, there's context switching, more disconnected context because they're not working in the same thing. They're VPs, they're 5 levels above a keyboard. So finally it comes back to Melissa and says, okay, let's do this, right? So they say, well, who knows these production services best? Everyone goes, oh, that's Ellen. Great, where's Ellen? Oh, we just put her on a plane to send her to the European office to help with a new product launch. All right, great. Well, who else knows this stuff, right? So we're waiting around to figure it out and says, oh, well, Scott, right? Scott is new. He kind of knows these things, right? Well, Scott's only been around for a couple of months. He's like, oh, boy, right? So what does Scott do? So Scott goes, rubbish bin diving, right? He's in SharePoint. He's looking at spreadsheets. He's trying to wiki documents, trying to figure out, hey, what's going on here? Okay, I think I got a handle on this. I'm going to go ahead and start restarting these services with these correct context variables. It's a lot of kind of manual work going on there. So he's doing it, going along. Notice the context wagon is getting bigger and bigger. This is all kind of showing up in people's inboxes. And he's going along and he says, bar service says waiting for Acme service. 10 minutes later, Acme startup failed. Scott's like, what is that? What's going on? I have no idea. Why is this happening? Come on, everybody's looking at me. He's like, wow, it's really hot in here. Like, is the air conditioning not gone? What's going on here, right? So Scott's like, oh my God. So, it's 5:30 at night. He's like, hey, the bar app startup timed out. Error says I can't connect. I log into that box. I can get to that service. I log into that service. I can get to that service. I have no idea what's going on. Can somebody help me, right? So the bar SRE, who he escalates to, says, oh, yeah, this is part of the new DevOps program. We have these environment pre-flight checks, and if the pre-flight check fails, the service startup fails, and we have to go and fix it. Looks like bar can't connect to Acme. The connection's being blocked. So updates the ticket to the network team, to both the network team and the bar lead devs. So I'll try 2 routes here. Right now I'm blasting the network team and the bar team saying, hey, what's going on here? More escalations, more task switching, more interruptions. Finally, this Lou, the lead dev for the bar team, says, hey, I can comment out that test, but my continuous delivery pipeline only goes to the QA environment. If I want to go into production, I got to call the change management people. Like, all right, forget you. You can go back to what you were doing. Let's put our hope on the network team, right? So more disconnected processes. Now, a little interlude here. This part was fun. So the business manager's saying, hey, customers are calling, what's going on? And of course, they call Melissa, the middleware manager. And in an epic bout of finger pointing, she goes, it's the network, right? They broke it. So they call the network VPs, and they're like, what's wrong with your network? Why are things broken? Well, unbeknownst to them, there was an actual network problem that was going on. So the network VPs were calling the network team and saying, you know that network problem you're working on, ignore everybody else. Just focus on that. That is your top priority. So when people were calling with this problem, they were being locked out, even though that was the problem that actually was the real problem. The network problem wasn't really a major issue. So nobody was answering when they were trying to escalate. Luckily, Scott, the new guy, had a round of beers with all the different kind of folks in different teams. And recently he drank with Carlos, director on the network team. And so he had his cell phone number. So he called him, explained the situation, said, I need a favor. Can you help us here, right? So finally he gets one of the network SREs and says, hey, yep, the firewall is blocking the traffic. You have to take it up with the firewall team, right? So he adds the firewall team. Freddie, the firewall engineer, shows up and says, hey, it can't be the firewall. We only make changes on Thursdays, and it's now Tuesday, so you're nuts. And he goes, no, I think, we actually haven't restarted these services for a week or so, so it could be the problem. And he goes, okay. So it's now 8 o'clock at night. Freddie looks into it and says, there was a rule change last Thursday that would stop the bar app from talking to the Acme app. Scott's like, can you change it back? And he says, sure. Every Thursday we make our changes, And they're like, no. So luckily, the chief of staff was running around. Susan's chief of staff was running around and says, hey, look, Freddie, the SVPs and the VPs are the directors are livid, right? This was supposed to be a safe change. We got to fix this, right? Freddie goes, now 9 o'clock at night, and says, hey, look, okay, I have to escalate this to the NetSec team because it's an emergency change, so he does that. Nicole, the NetSec manager, says, are you nuts? This is production. I'll have to get the network cab together and get 3 out of 5 people to approve. And this whole rigmarole. And then luckily, the chief of staff, Susan's chief of staff, says the most important words, which is, I'm going to tell Susan if we don't escalate this, right? And ding, ticket approved, firewall change. Firewall change has happened. So more escalation, more processes, more task switching, more misaligned priorities. Finally, 9:30 at night, the context wagon's getting bigger and bigger. They've approved this emergency firewall rule change. And so finally, Freddie and Bob and Scott start doing this kind of, making some changes, trying things. It looks like it's pretty good. Things are starting up. I think we're good. And everyone's like, well, you think you're good. Like, why don't we know we're good? And it's like, well, we have this thing where we don't really trust people to check their changes, so we need a customer engagement team member to check the APIs to make sure they're functioning properly. They don't let us check our own APIs. So more manual work, more partially done work, so we can't check it, more escalations, more task switching, more extra process, right? So now it's 11 o'clock at night, right? Well, who's the customer engagement manager who has the special tool to check the API? Her name is Varsha. True story. Where's Varsha? At her birthday party, right? So she's out at dinner with friends. She has to come home early and go through and run from her laptop, connect to the VPN, check to see if the APIs are okay before she can hightail it back to her own birthday. APIs are all right. So we've got life interruptions now, more extra process. And services are restarted, right? Ticket closed. Woo, everything's good. It's now 11:30 at night, right? So the piece de resistance here, right? The very next day, Susan calls the emergency meeting, right? And it's like, whose fault is this? Why are we so bad at change, right? What additional processes and approvals can we put in place so this will never happen again, right? So everybody hangs their head and, oh, thank you. All right, that's my talk. I'll see you later. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So, and this realization happens, which is this doesn't happen like one time. This is happening all the time, these kinds of things, right? And the executive team finally getting together was like, hey, look, we've invested in cloud, agile, DevOps, containers, right? But why does everything still take too long and cost too much, right? And finally they realized, hey, we've never really focused on operations, right? It's all been about deployment. It's all been about pipelines. It's all been about go, the app layer. But we're forgetting that we're in the business of running software. We don't write software for profit. We run software for profit. Maybe we need to rethink how we're approaching operations. And the reality is most companies chase the symptoms, right? So there's this kind of conventional wisdom in operations. How you solve these problems is you chase all these different symptoms by applying this kind of logic of, oh, number one, we need better tools, right? If we just get Kubernetes in there, it's going to be fine, right? Or, just like if it was Ansible, and then before that it was Chef, and before that it was Puppet, before that was Blade Logic, and then it was CF Engine, and go back and back. We're always one tool away, right? And if we just get the new tool, then these problems will all go away. We need more people, right? Which is laughable, because if we could even find these people, right? Who can find an unlimited number of qualified people, right? Nobody, right? So we can't find enough people, and if we throw more people at this, things aren't getting better. A lot of organizations, that's the only coping mechanism that they have. So that doesn't work. This one is probably my favorite. We need more discipline and attention to detail, right? This is like telling developers, hey, write less bugs, right? It's just a ridiculous, it's a ridiculous statement. And then we need more change reviews and approvals. I think we saw putting more Band-Aids on top of this scar tissue that we've built up just makes things worse, right? It makes things more disconnected and slowed down. So, my thesis is, that we've got to stop following this conventional wisdom, because it hasn't worked to date, right? We spent 20, 30 years, running services, with this kind of mindset involved, and it's not working, right? Instead, we've got to challenge the conventional wisdom about operations work and what it is. So there's these 4 forces. I call them the 4 horsemen of the operations apocalypse, right? But that you see consistently across organizations, especially that have kind of legacy, complex, multi-generational kind of operations organizations, and these kind of 4 forces combine to sort of be the root of a lot of these problems that we see, right? And they're low trust, excessive toil, silos, and queues. And I'm going to go into kind of each one of those. So the first one, low trust. If you think about it, where are decisions made, right? Who can take the action? If you think about it, the people closest to the problem, right? They have all the context, right? Their face is rubbing against the tree, right? They know the pain of what's going on. They have all the detail. But yet, who do we empower to make decisions and take action? It's usually the highest paid person in the room, or the most senior person, right? We want to escalate things and get approval to do things, or escalate to be told what to do. Often we don't even let the people who respond, the L1 responders, to even have any kind of control, right? And John Allspaw did this great thing at the DevOps Enterprise Summit I liked that was really good. He talks about that all operations work is contextual, right? He did this thing where he said, hey, is this dangerous, right? Now, I know some of you just kind of puckered up a little bit right when you saw that, right? But what if I told you that, hey, this is just a little routine that we run on a content cache periodically to clear things out, right? Okay, not so dangerous. Then he said, what about this? Is this dangerous, right? Yeah, we're just changing the case of a comment, right? Doesn't seem too dangerous, right? But what if I told you this is a health check for a load balancer, right? Now suddenly changing the text can be dangerous, right? And his point was the answer is always it depends, right? All operations work is contextual. So what we're doing is we're separating the people who have the context from the place that the decision is being made. So this low trust environment, we don't trust the people, the lower skilled people, the people on call with actually solving the problem, is pulling apart the context and the people who need to make that decision. Another major undermining issue is this idea of excessive toil. And toil, it's one of the great things that came out of the SRE movement. And it's this idea that, I'll use Vivek Rao's definition here, that toil is the kind of work tied to running a production service, so it's operations work, that tends to be manual. It's the stuff you do, right? Needs human labor. It's repetitive. You see it over and over again. It's automatable, meaning we probably should have automated it. It's tactical and devoid of enduring value, meaning that we're not actually moving the company forward, not making tomorrow better than today. We're just, just kind of keeping the lights on. It may be necessary, but we're just kind of running in place almost, right? And it scales linearly as a service grows. If we have 1,000 users today and 1 million users tomorrow, if we need to add a whole bunch of more people, chances are we've got a lot of toil in our system. And why toil is so important is because the opposite of toil is engineering work, right? So, toil lacks that enduring value. Engineering work is being able to build enduring value. We're making tomorrow better than today. Toil tends to be rote and repetitive. Engineering work is creative and iterative. It's tactical versus strategic, and so on. And really, most importantly, the toil could be automated versus engineering work that kind of requires that human creativity. And why it's so important is that toil crowds out the engineering work, right? And because engineering work is important because we can use it, number one, to improve the business, but number two, we can use it to beat back that toil, to reduce the toil. And when you find these organizations where they have too much toil, it crowds out the ability to do the engineering work, and you have no capacity to reduce that toil. So you're kind of stuck in this downward spiral. And if you go inside big enterprises, a lot of operations teams, that's what they're stuck in. They're just constantly running in place, trying to keep their head above water. And that crowds out any other work we're able to do. Third area here is, or kind of force that undermines us, is silos, right? And people use the word silos a lot. Often it's kind of confused with teams, but it's not really have to do with structure. It's more about how people are working. So if you imagine, when you're in a small team or a single person, you have kind of one backlog, one common set of information, one way of using tools, one kind of backlog or priorities, your management stream you're working from. But nothing lives in isolation, especially in the enterprise. So what ends up happening is you need something from somebody else, right? And now they're in their own silo, right? Their own backlog, their own priorities, their own ways of using even sometimes the same tools. And what happens is that's when you start to get these problems and these handoffs and these requests. And people, when they have problems, they start to turn inward. So you start to, sharp elbows, protect your capacity, and more issues start to arise. And these silos cause these disconnects and mismatches because we're working out of context for different processes, different tooling, different capacity mismatches. You only have 4 DBAs and 50 developers, right? It becomes an issue, which leads us to queues, right? So what do we do? So we've got these silos and we've got these disconnects and mismatches. How do we solve for these problems? Well, what we do is we put these things called ticket queues in the middle, right? Like that's going to solve our problem. But the reality is we know how well that works, right? How many times do you fill out a ticket and then you have to go get somebody to escalate it for you because no one's answering it, and then you finally get something back and it's not what you expected or it's a little bit different. So we see all these conflicts that happen from that. And it's not surprising, because if you look in other fields, they've already figured this out, right? That queues, if you look in manufacturing, product design, queues are costly, right? They make longer cycle times just by the nature of putting something in something. They increase risks, right? Things take longer to get done. The risk grows. There's more variability, right? You get a lot of one-offs and variation in that queue-driven way of working. There's more overhead. We have to manage the queues. There's lower quality because we have the more variability and longer cycle times. And also less motivation. People get demotivated when they put something into a queue and it sits, and they don't see the feedback of their work. So Don Reinertsen, who's a pretty well-known academic, writes about these issues, talks a lot about this. There's even whole theories or whole sections of math, queuing theory about this. So queues are very expensive, yet we keep using them as like they're cheap, right? And another problem with queues is they become these snowflake makers, right? We're trying to automate and make things consistent in our world. And there's this term of snowflake, which I love because it effectively means if you look at a snowflake, it's technically beautiful, it's perfect, right? But the reality is it's very brittle, and it's different, and it's difficult, and basically you can't reproduce it. There's only one in the world, right? So with queues, we keep filling out tickets. Someone on the other side comes in, does whatever it is, moves on to the next thing, does whatever that is, and we end up creating all these one-offs, all these snowflakes, which, to mix metaphors, become like time bombs, right? Things are a little different here or there, not what you expect. The only thing worse than automation that doesn't work is automation that's just a little bit wrong, right? Causes huge problem. To err is human. To create a disaster, you need a shell script. So these are the 4 issues, right? So what can we do differently, right? So we kind of go through these. Again, the first one with trust, right? We got to shift left the ability to take action, right? So push the ability for people to take action as close to the problem as possible. They have the context. Now, we can't just give people free rein. How do we give them the enablement and the tooling to actually, take action? And by the way, today at 4:45, I'm going to be doing a talk more in depth on all these, a lot of these solutions. So it's in room 7, 4:45. So Little plug there. Excessive toil, what can we do about that, right? Well, reducing toil is pretty straightforward. Again, I'm going to talk more about this later this afternoon. But number one is about tracking the toil levels for the team. Seems pretty obvious, but very few organizations actually do that, actually look at, on the whole, how much of our team's time is spent on this could be automated, not adding enduring value toil, versus how much time is being spent on the value-added, moving the ball forward engineering work. Set those toil limits for each team. Kind of in the SRE conversation right now, it's 50% is about the recommended balance, right? I think it has something to do with balance there. And then fund the efforts to reduce that toil. Again, I'll kind of mention this this afternoon, but the main idea is emphasizing on we need to actually have funded programs to say we're going to go help those teams that are being buried under this repetitive work to get them out of it so we can reuse that human capacity for other things. Some recent books by O'Reilly. I actually wrote a chapter for Seeking SRE, but there's some other books on SRE as well. The Google SRE books are actually available through O'Reilly, free online. But a great discussion of toil and error budgets and these other lessons from the SRE world. So silos. So what are we going to do about silos? Well, the first obvious idea is, well, let's get rid of as many silos as possible, right? A lot of the kind of driving force behind this is, cross-functional teams. A lot of people like to say, hey, well, we put the build and the test and the run on the same team. But what's key about this is often gets confused for everybody must know how to do everything. And the reality is more about horizontal shared responsibility across those different functions versus everybody doing everything. And a case in point is you can think about there's kind of two models. There's the Netflix model and the Google model that people kind of cartoonishly refer to. And the Netflix model is all about cross-functional teams, right? It's all about how do we make these build and run teams that are responsible for creating and running these services. And that's how they have that shared responsibility. They're on the same team, right? But then if you look at the Google model, it's very different. They have a distinct development organization and a distinct operations organization, but they've created these other mechanisms to have clear handoff requirements, to have the error budgets with consequences to drive that shared responsibility. And they have the same high-quality, high-velocity results. You get people together from both organizations at conferences. They use the same language. They see the world very similarly, except their organizations look very, very different. So the org model is not the answer. It's about that shared responsibility. So what about the cross-cutting concerns, right? Well, I can't put everybody on every one of these teams. So aren't I just right back to this problem of having to put all these ticket queues everywhere, right? And all the problems that come with that. So that brings us to just how do we get rid of the queues, right? So the things that we can't get rid of through realigning our organization, through these cross-functional teams, there's a design pattern that we've been kind of trying to document. We named it, my colleagues and I, but we see this repeated at a lot of different companies. And it's the idea of self-service operations. How do we let those specialist teams, encourage them to encapsulate their best practices into pull-based services that other people and other teams can use as they go. And it really works with any organization model, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're in this, there's a dev and an ops, or if you're in the cross-functional teams. It's about saying, what are the specialist things that we can't put in every team? How do we build consistency by encouraging them to create these pull-based self-services? And my talk this afternoon, 4:45, room 7, talks a lot about the self-service operations pattern and how folks do it. And it also helps with that security and compliance, which is a huge problem. You saw in that previous story I told. A lot of these problems, these organizations, come from the fact that they think, oh, we couldn't do this because we can't need security boundaries, compliance boundaries. But this is a great way to get around that. So, are all tickets bad? No. Number one, just use the ticket queues for what they're good for. Number one, documenting true problems, issues, exceptions, trouble tickets. Right, that was the original idea. Pretty good at that. And routing for necessary approvals, sometimes regulatory reasons, security reasons, we have to have this human approval chain. Ticket systems are pretty good for that. But where they fail us is use them as a general work management system. That's where the problems really come from. So two stories I'm going to go into more in depth this afternoon, but talking about how Ticketmaster has strategically used this self-service idea. They went from a 47-minute MTTR for their major web properties down to 3.8 minutes. It's like a 90% reduction, all from rejiggering how they do, they call it support at the edge, right? They're pushing control closer to the people who have who had the context for the problem and empowering the organization with self-service. It was like an 18-month story. I'll go into to that. Same way Standard Chartered Bank, same type of thing. Massive fragmentation, a lot of security and compliance issues. They were able to strategically use the self-service idea to kind of transform how they work. And again, my talk this afternoon, a little preview, I'll go into that in more depth. And there's kind of an open source kind of thing we're working on, my colleagues and I, trying to document these self-service patterns and talk about how folks are doing it. You can read the whole thing online. Feedback's totally welcome. We're trying to turn it into a GitHub project. It's a little hard with the formatting and whatnot. But if you want to participate in that or talk about that, love to hear from you. So recap, because I am over time. Number one, don't forget about ops, right? Challenge that conventional wisdom. Number two, understand the forces undermining operations work. Number three, shift left that control and decision making, right? Four, I think really look to the SRE movement, talking about reducing toil and creating that capacity for change. A lot of great work going on there. Focus on removing silos and queues, and then leverage that self-service design pattern wherever you can. Get rid of those queues. And that's my talk. I'll be around the rest of the day. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.